I'm Will Hardy, husband, father, entrepreneur, hotelier, and filmmaker, and a man in the middle of his story. I've had wins, I've had breakdowns, I've had moments where I felt unstoppable, and moments where I didn't know if I could take one more step. And I know I'm not the only one. This podcast is a place where we tell the truth, where leaders, dreamers, husbands, wives, entrepreneurs can come clean about the real journey. Because together, we heal faster. Together, we get clearer. Together, we rise. This is an invitation to walk with me, not after it's perfect, but while it's still being written. Welcome to Interrupt. Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Interrupt podcast. My name is Will and I'm your host. I am so excited about today's guest. This man is a visionary minister, filmmaker, author, and worship leader, passionate about helping people encounter God through authentic, transformative worship. He's a co-author of It's All About Worship, A Journey to the Heart of God Through Worship. He's former leader of the Upper Room Collective for 7 years, shaping worship and culture community. He's also a film producer and a motivational speaker focused on faith-driven storytelling. He's also the co-host of the Song Lab podcast, exploring worship, creativity, and artistry. Last but not least, currently he's helping lead Shepherd's Grove, soon to be Cathedral in Orange County, California, with Bobby and Hannah Schuler, where he now resides with his lovely bride, Meredith, and their 3 beautiful children. Without further ado, Michael Mauldin, welcome to the Interrupt podcast, brother.
Man, that's a big intro. I'm used to being just called Meredith's husband. That's usually my intro.
Hey, there could be worse things to be called, you know?
That's right. That's right.
Buddy, it is so good to see you, man. You and I are going to have a lot of fun today. This podcast is about interviewing and speaking to world-class leaders in all different sectors, really the 7 mountain strategy, as you and I have talked about in the
Yeah.
past, and trying to hit all kinds of different mountains. And, the interrupt is a play on the word interrupt, which is kind of like how life's interruptions that fall into your lap sometimes can not just set you up for success, but with the right attitude can really be the breaking point into a whole nother phase and season of your life. Kind of what the enemy meant for
Yeah.
evil, God can kind of turn around and make it good. So we're going to jump into
I
all
love
this,
that.
man. But Michael, tell the crowd, tell the audience where exactly you at right now. I know you just had a recent move similar to myself, and I just want to hear about that journey for a minute.
Yeah, for the last 5 years, my wife and I, we most of our income had been tied to being on the road and itinerant, and we were just praying for a home base. And something opened up for us out in California, and I was like, isn't everybody leaving California, God? I feel like I'm going the wrong way. Um, but we came out here, and we came out here for a job at another church. And 3 months into it, it was just the wrong fit of wrong fits. I mean, philosophically, we were like inverted,
Mm,
you know?
yeah.
And so it just wasn't going to work out. And so we had to step away and didn't know what we were going to do because we just moved out to California and it's triple the cost out here.
Mm,
And I talk about an interrupt moment, right? You're just like, okay, you think you're coming out here for one thing. And then we ended up connecting with Bobby and Hannah Schuler, and they have this legacy church. They've been around for 70 years. And his grandfather had a church called the Crystal Cathedral and has a TV show called The Hour of Power. It's been a second longest running TV show in America, actually 60 Minutes.
mm,
This big legacy ministry that's going through a
wow.
big transition right now.
Cool.
And to where the pastors, the grandfather's a legacy of like seeker sensitive church. And then the grandson, Bobby, is just hungry for the presence of God. He's like, how do we do the opposite of that?
Mm,
And they were just like kindred spirits, hungry for God, into the arts and media, and how do we transform culture and get a hold of the next generation. And so we ended up partnering together, and we're in this process of just it's a real transformation of shifting the church model, of really this idea that much of the church has turned priests into consumers. And so we're going like, how do we turn consumers back into priests again?
mm. That's a fantastic vision, brother. So, we met in Atlanta, right? And
Yeah.
like myself, you've got a large family, and this is not the first move you've made, right? There's been several moves that God has kind of had you on these unique journeys. And what I've always been super impressed about you and your wife specifically is that
when you hear the voice of God, you move. You don't sit around, you don't wait,
Yeah.
which is a rare thing. I would almost call it like, you performing this kind of gift of faith, right? Like that's something that God has kind of uniquely created within you. And so to watch your passion, to follow the journey, it's been absolutely incredible to watch, and to call you a friend has been very special to me. But
Oh,
if
thanks, bro.
if we go back to meeting each other in Atlanta, it was kind of a unique story because the last move that you had made, from Texas at that point, right? You were in Texas, and coming out of another ministry, you landed in Atlanta. You needed a place to live, and just so happened that I'd been working on a property near Serenbe and Chattahoochee Hills, and we connected, and just immediately felt like I wanted to give this home, a beautiful home, to your family, because I knew that transitions, so was so intense. So that was really cool. But it's funny. I want to talk about just moving for a second, because I've read this, like out of the top five catastrophic things that can happen to you in your life, right? It's like a loss of a friend or a family, lose your
Yeah.
job, go through a divorce, and actual moving, right? Like moving your
Yeah.
life to a whole
Yeah.
other place. Tell me about that,
Yeah.
Michael. What was that like this last go around for you guys?
Well, I think I've moved 30 times in my life. So,
Wow.
it's like, here we go again, God. And I love the adventure with God. Like, I love, going on that exploratory thing. And transition is hard. And the way I describe transition to people is like, if you have a glass of water that's got dirt in it, shake up the glass and it's foggy, you can't see anything. And so you just have to trust that, okay, eventually, it's like, if I keep just moving forward, the dust will settle and I'll be able to see clearly again.
Mm,
And that's the way it is in every transition. And so I think we've always just leaned into the story of the Israelites going from, bondage into the promised land. Their biggest struggle was complaining. And when they began to complain, it's because they're staring at all the problems and they got stuck. And so our warfare in the midst of transition is like, how do we stay thankful and grateful and focus on what's God doing, what's He said, and that's going to lead us to where we're going to go, because it's hard to see it at the time.
mm. So
So
so true, man. Yeah,
yeah.
I can relate to that. And it's all the moving parts, and I think as husbands and providers and fathers, we always carry this kind of unrealistic weight, right? To make sure that the house is settled, mama's happy, kids are in order. I mean, because obviously the kids had to go back into a new school system, right? Which is
Yeah,
always
yeah,
can
yeah,
also
totally.
be another challenge. How was that? How was it,
Yeah.
the conversation with you and Meredith, looking back at the kids, going, all right, I know we just got here. We haven't been settled too long, but it's time to pick up and move
Yeah.
again. How did they respond to that?
So we always bring our kids into the journey with us. And we say, hey, look, guys, this is what we've been praying about. This is what we feel God is showing us. Look, we've been praying this. Look at this. Look what's happening. And so because we invite them into the journey, we ask them to pray about it too. You
Mm,
guys pray about it. Like, and our boys were pretty on board pretty quick. My daughter was in high school, so it was harder for her. And she came up to us eventually after we had her go process it with the Lord. And she came back to us and she was crying and she's like, look, I don't really want to do this, but I know it's God, you
wow.
know?
Wow.
And so she's in that point, it's like, all right, we're in. And so my prayer then is like, God, would you give them the grace to transition so that they transition well? And after 3 months in, I was asking them, do you guys want to go back? And they're like, no, we're good. It's nice out here.
Mm. Isn't that beautiful,
So,
man?
man, answered prayer. It was amazing. It was really amazing.
Well, it's a testament to obviously the goodness of God, but it's also a testament to your and your wife's leadership and parenting skills, right? It's, when you hear this whole idea that there's no miniature Holy Spirit, right? The same Holy
Yeah.
Spirit that lives in all of us is within our children, and they have the
Yes.
same.
Oh,
Go ahead, please.
yes. No, in that vein, in one of our moves, we're seeking the Lord as we should move from to leave the upper room in Dallas, which we had been planning for 7 years, our closest friends, and to go do this film venture in Thomasville, Georgia,
Mm.
with a buddy of ours, Michael Carney. And we were praying about it. And our youngest son at that time, he only said one word. He only said no, 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 no. He had never said the word yes. Okay.
Hmm.
So we're sitting there praying, and he's right at our feet. We go, God, should we move from Dallas to Thomasville? And out of his mouth, he goes, yes, had never said yes before.
Wow.
Like never come out of his mouth. We got chills. We was like the fear of the Lord hit us because we know this kid had never said anything outside of no. You know, and we didn't move just because of that, but it was one of like several things that the Lord just kind of confirming that we were supposed to go. So to your point, out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah, man. Well, you know, it's part of the four quadrant behind this podcast is parenting, right? And we talk to some of the leading experts about parenting and what that looks like. And you know, I know myself,
Mm.
Michael. You know, I've had a tendency to carry father guilt, right? Just like, did I do it right? Did I put them on the wrong journey? And for us to make this last move that we did from Atlanta to Bardstown, Kentucky,
Yeah.
it was taxing on so many levels, right?
Yeah.
And not to imagine you had, you know, four hormonal teenage kids in the mix of this, right?
Yeah.
And leaving everything that they'd ever known behind, all the friendships, the school that they were secure in, the house that they loved.
Yeah.
And I tell you, man, I really carried a lot of guilt for probably the first 6 months, you know, just trying to balance
Wow.
their emotions, you know, and
It's real.
reassuring
Yeah.
them that, you know, hey, God's got our back and we're on the right path. And but it's funny you said that because I was just recently we did a small vacation as a family, and I looked at everybody one night at dinner and I said, look, this last 2 years has been an absolute whirlwind. And I said, but looking back on it, do you believe this is where we're supposed to be? And they were like, Dad, I can't even believe we're saying this because of all the turmoil and the emotions and the feelings that we had, but we wouldn't change it for the world now, you know?
That's
And it
awesome. I
just like you
love
get
it.
like a
Yeah.
little tear in your eye, you know?
Tear. Yeah.
Yeah, just
I
like,
got
all
one
right,
for
God,
you.
you know,
Yeah.
you got us, you know? But that's so cool, man.
Yeah.
And I've seen that with your kids. And I want to talk about, well, actually, let's go to Thomasville for a second. Let's talk about that journey
Yeah.
because you're a filmmaker as well, and I want to talk about your documentary that you created and produced. If we can hit that for a second, but what was the project you were working on in Thomasville?
So this involves the story that you brought up a little bit with as it relates to the house. Okay.
Yep.
So we moved to Thomasville, Georgia, to work on several projects, several film projects. And we had raised investor money. We had raised some for this one project on a story on forgiveness. 2020 hits, the world locks down, investor money ties up,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to use that money for a different type of a project that didn't really align with where we were spiritually. So we were just like, hey, that's not for us. We're going to go a separate route. And we were wrestling because we were separating from the team. Should we move back to Texas or should we go to Atlanta? Because most of our team was moving to Atlanta, and we were kind of in between places. And that's when we met you, and you're like, "Hey, I know this perfect place. It's up by Serenbe. I'd never even heard of Serenbe."
Yeah.
And in the midst of that, you go, "Hey, do you guys?" You asked us if we had a 501c3. We had our own nonprofit, and we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have one at the time, and I didn't really need one. And you're like, "Well, I just feel like I'm supposed to get you guys one." And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, but I'm really been in the film business. I know my wife does ministry. I don't know why we need this, but you insisted on it, and I was like, man, this okay, all right. So let's roll with it. I'm going to trust his faith. And so the house wasn't ready. It took a little bit longer, so we ended up having to go to Tampa. Right, and Tampa is where my father lived because so he's got a place down there. We rented a condo, and in the middle of that, this crazy worship leader named Sean Foyt comes to town. He's doing these events called Let Us Worship because the world had locked down, and California specifically told churches you can't stay open, but bars can stay open and strip clubs stay open, but churches can't, and you definitely can't sing.
Mm.
And he's like, he had friends. He'd always uh, taken the gospel to the darkest parts of the world, and the church leaders from these persecuted countries are going, "You're not going to listen to that governor, are you? You better not listen to him. That's how it started in our country. Don't you do it."
Mm.
So we started to do these Let Us Worship events, and he comes to Tampa to do a Let Us Worship event. And that week that he had come to Tampa to do a Let Us Worship event, we had just got the 501c3, and I just got the bank account set up like 3 days before he comes to do this event.
Mm.
So he comes to do the event. It's on September 18th. September 18th is kind of like a dark day in history for me because it's my brother's birthday.
Mm.
And my brother was from Tampa. My brother had committed suicide 3 years prior.
Mm.
Okay. And so he's coming to do this event. And I'm telling you, this is the middle of the height of the lockdown. Stay 6 feet apart. Don't leave your house. And he's doing an event downtown Tampa where 6,000 people are about to show up. And I'm praying, going, all right, God, there's a lot of emotions here. The whole planet saying don't gather. It's the death, my brother's birthday. He's from Tampa. My parents are mourning. I'm bringing them flowers.
Yeah.
And so I began to pray. I go, okay, God, what do you want me to do with this? I'm feeling all kind of emotions. And I heard this phrase come to my spirit. It's time to plunder hell on your brother's behalf.
Mm.
And I was like, ooh, I like the sound of that. I don't know what it means, but I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
Because I've always held on to, like, to your point about these interruptions, I've always held on to God's going to turn something tragic thing into good. I don't know how he's going to turn my brother's suicide into something good and use it as a weapon, but I've always held on to that. A buddy of mine said, this is going to become like Goliath's sword in your hand. That thing that was meant to take you out is going to become a weapon in your hand,
Mm.
you know? And so when I heard that phrase, it's time to plunder hell on your brother's behalf, I go to the event and 6,000 people are there. They're preaching the gospel. People are getting baptized in cattle troughs. I mean, it's incredible what's happening. But the first thing that the speaker, Sean Foyt, was talking about was the very first event they did was on the Golden Gate Bridge. And there was so many cops there. But the cops were there because they were on suicide patrol because so many people were committing suicide because of the lockdowns.
Mm.
And that's the first story he starts telling. And I didn't tell him anything about my brother, that what I'm wrestling with internally, shares this stuff. And then he just hands me the mic and goes, hey, do you have anything you want to share? And I grabbed the mic and go, yeah, I do. And I started thinking about Tampa and how the theme of Tampa is Buccaneers and Pirates, right? It's just like what Tampa's about. And I started to share that. And I said, there's a godly version of that thing. I go, the godly version is when Jesus died, he went down into Hades and he took back the keys of death in Hades and he plundered hell. I go, we're going to plunder hell today. And I began to share the story of my brother. He was bound in suicide, bound in darkness, and he was from Tampa and he had died of suicide. And I'm like bawling. And I was like, but I don't want to lose any more brothers and sisters to suicide. So if you're struggling with this, I want you to come down here. I want to pray with you. I want to see this broken off of your life.
Mm.
And all these men come rushing to the flooding to the front of the stage. And I'm weeping over them, praying over them, crying. And this moment goes viral online. And people are saying, they're emailing in from all over the world saying, man, I'm struggling with suicide or depression. I'm feeling this break off of my life watching this. I'm getting hope,
Mm.
And so because we were homeless, we started going city to city. And people were like, hey, we want to donate to you guys. Do you have a ministry? And I was like, I just got a bank account set up 3 days ago because this crazy guy, Will Hardy in Atlanta, was like, you guys need a 501c3,
Yeah.
And people started just donating to us. I mean, we got the bank account set up 3 days before this event. Nobody ever asked us to give us money. All of a sudden, because of this event, people are asking us to give us money. And we started traveling around the country doing these events, seeing, people get set free from suicide and depression, saved. And it was incredible. And we ended up doing a documentary film around this, kind of this movement because they, in the midst of this, they also went to the corners of where George Floyd was murdered. And there was all these riots that took place and they saw the riots turn to revival and people getting baptized in racial reconciliation meetings. And so there was so many through lines of what God was doing in the midst of a season where the world had gone mad and people were, there was all this tension, and we got to document what God was doing in America in the midst of that.
Gosh, unbelievable, man. Woo, gets me emotional. It's funny.
I know, right?
I kind of forgot about that story, man, to be honest with you. And sometimes when God uses you in those ways, it's like it does kind of feel out of body sometimes, And but there was no doubt that was intentional and that was for a reason, and the timing couldn't have worked out any more perfect. So there was a season when all that
Totally.
kind of, and I want to get back to the suicide thing if we can touch on that, man, just in a
Yeah.
minute, because
Yeah.
I feel faith kind of just coming from the screen right now, and I want to bring hope in a world that needs hope now more probably than ever. But as you were traveling through that, right? I mean, you guys started doing really kind of bouncing from city to city, state to state, doing these massive worship events, and it was a lot of controversy around this. I mean, this was getting
A lot.
national and worldly exposure from the news, and it was really like a showdown. Unfortunately, what you wouldn't expect, almost good versus evil. Can you tell me about some of those stories and, when you were traveling from city to city and some of the powerful things that you saw?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we did like 22 cities around that season. And I just want to say this kind of a sidebar, but 2020 was the best time to travel ever because nobody was flying. We had $35 plane tickets for our family.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah, it was super controversial because, people were saying that we're hosting super spreader events. The Rolling Stone did an article and said called Jesus Christ Super Spreader.
Mm.
The mayor of Nashville, mayor of New Orleans were condemning it and said they were going to do contact tracing back to our events to see that we're spreading COVID. And what's ironic about it is they couldn't trace any COVID cases back to the events.
Mm.
And even the mayor of Nashville, which is even more surprising, he came back out and said and admitted such, which was actually super honorable that he did that. But yeah, there was, so much tension. I mean, we went to do an event in New Year's in Los Angeles, and Antifa was there, and Antifa was like smashing our drums and trying to fight us. And they were there when the team went up to Portland and Seattle, and Antifa was like throwing like these little firebomb kind of things and smoke bombs, and it got pretty intense. It was fearful for a lot of the team. Thankfully, nobody got hurt. But there was just a lot of fear and intimidation around all of it. And yet, in the midst of it, man, we were seeing so many people like encouraged and strengthened, being able to gather because people were. I think one of the, we need connection. We're made for connection, and I think that season where everybody was so disconnected and having to be forced to stay in their home, it caused a lot of trauma for a lot of people. And the church is supposed to be the place of hope and connection, to connect to one another and to connect to God.
Yeah.
And when that thing's not there, evil can run rampant.
Well, and the coolest thing that I watched with that, Michael, is that in a time that we're living in where some people are, maybe you call it deconstructing, right, their faith, or they've had not the best experiences within the church, the structure of the walls of
Yeah.
the church, right, the
Yeah.
hierarchy and the
Yeah.
power and some of the things that if we're not careful,
Yeah.
everybody can fall into. But
Yeah.
this had a level of authenticity around the fact that it was open air, right? It wasn't in a
Yeah.
building. It wasn't in a building. It wasn't about, serving under one person. There wasn't, a leader per se. There wasn't a pastor per se, but it was just hungry people wanting to bring hope through worship, through connection, and through community. And I guarantee, man, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, but I just feel like that opened up a whole nother door and avenue for people that would never step foot into the church to come into an environment and experience like that and feel safe enough to do it without the religious constraints. Is that what you saw as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just about every event, people were throwing their weed pipes, their weed bags, needles from heroin, cigarettes, vapes, like tobacco powder. I mean, everything. People are just throwing their junk on the stage. And
Wow.
these are people that aren't going to go to church, aren't stepping foot in churches, right? But they're like, they know that there's something going on. God's doing something, or they're curious about God, and they're realizing that there's all these other things holding them back, or these other things that people are leaning into to try to find some sort of comfort, but it's not bringing comfort, it's bringing more torment internally. And they were, you know getting free of those things, and it was
Mm.
beautiful to see that kind of a natural movement, which are things that you don't see in a church.
Yeah.
And there was this one moment was really beautiful. It was in Aurora, Colorado, and it's actually the suicide capital of America. And I think that week that we were there was like 7 kids, like under the age of 12, that had attempted suicide or something like that.
Mm.
And I'm just like, how is it that that many young kids in a place would even think to do that? So there's obviously some kind of a spiritual element to that
Yeah.
over that region. And we went to this, we had an event, and this one was inside a church actually, but there was probably 3,000 people in there. And we just said, hey, if you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, depression that way, would you please come up on the stage? And then all these young people come up on the stage. And then we had them, we had the crowd come to the front of the stage, and we had everybody that came up on the stage run and jump and dive off into the crowd. And we crowd surfed every one of them. And you see the smiles, they jump back, and the smiles that hit
Mm.
their faces. This idea that the church, we're lifting you up. We're going to lift you up in the midst of this. We don't want anything, to happen to you. We want to see, joy break out in your life. And it was this beautiful moment, but things that you don't normally see in a church kind of a setting, right? It's just something
Absolutely.
spontaneous and strengthening people and kind of breaking them out of their paradigm, hopefully giving them a dose of hope.
Wow. Were you getting support from the local communities when you showed up in these events outside of the controversy of COVID and super spreader? Did it get to be to where, the local communities and maybe the police department, were people surrounding like in a positive way for you guys after this thing continued to break out? Or was it just different each city that you went into?
You have a little of both, but what's interesting is because the police were such on edge because it was the midst of like George Floyd riots, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we were doing these in public places, and they would come to try to shut us down. And the mayor had sent the cops to shut us down, but then we started praying for the cops, and they saw our heart, and they were like, Watch them just keep going for a little longer. Just keep going. Just keep doing what you're doing. We need this,
Come on,
So
man.
they would actually see it. That would happen over and over. They'd come to shut us down. They
Mm.
saw the spirit of what was happening, and they were like, they're like, this is God, and we need this in our community. Like we need God,
Wow.
you know.
Yeah, man. That's beautiful.
So, but yeah, there was plenty of people that were wanting to shut us down, that were against us, and even churches.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of churches that were also on board. They were like, I think churches that know history, that have studied communism and seen these kind of things throughout history. They see the schemes of the enemy, and they're like, hey, this is not God. Yeah, we want to protect people. We want to protect the elderly from a virus, but the majority of people, 99.9% of people, are going to be okay.
Yeah.
I think common sense, could see that. But in the midst of fear, common sense goes out the door. Fear clouds people, man.
Mm.
What an eye opener, right? Is to see how fear you can manipulate people with fear through that season.
There's a lot of that going on, propaganda all across the news waves. Everybody had their own personal battle, and it'd be curious to see, of course, and we heard stories, right? But it'd be curious to see the suicide rates and how they did increase, especially in that
Yeah,
time. Michael, because this is such a passionate thing for you and your family now, just going back to your
yeah,
brother, if you can maybe just speak to the audience about this, because we all need to hear this, and these are some of the conversations that I don't think we're talking about enough, right? And there's so many people that do feel alone, and you have these teenagers, cutting themselves, and they're in so much pain, and they're reverting to anything they can to just kind of escape and separate and disassociate from reality, right? Because
yeah,
the
yes.
pain is so real. With your brother, were there telltale signs? Did you all see anything that you thought was taking him down that path?
Yeah, his was a little different because I think there was a deeply spiritual component to his. He had dealt with a lot of rejection from churches.
Mm.
Um, and and because of that, he had isolated himself and went off doing a ton of high level spiritual warfare on his own. He had a heart for God, and he wanted to do the right thing, but he didn't trust, I think, to your point, the local structure of the church, the hierarchy of the church, because he had tried to confront leadership with things that he was like, I don't see this biblically.
Mm.
And because of that, he got rejected. And I think that's the thing that we're seeing over and over right now in a lot of churches, that people are bringing to the surface, even online, is that they're trying to bring, you know, some sort of accountability to leadership, the things that are off, and then they end up becoming the problem because of this kind of narcissistic ideal, or that these leaders are put in positions without another authority structure over them, where there's kind of health, so that healthy correction can be made
Mhm.
to leaders. And so because of that, he just went off on his own. And I mean, I don't know how else to say it other than, he was really trying to fight principalities and powers on his own.
Mm.
And when he passed away, like a moment, it was like a month before he died, I saw him, and we had been kind of estranged relationally for a few years because he was so focused on the enemy. Everything was so negative.
Mm.
He saw an enemy behind every bush. He was constantly trying to battle the enemy constantly. And it was just, and it always created a sense of fear. And I was like, I didn't want this around my kids. And I went up to him and I said, hey man, I'm sorry for how we've been estranged over the last few years. Like if I was taking ownership for my part of it. I was like, hey man, if there's anything I've done, like, would you forgive me? And he just goes, nope.
Really?
And I just saw this coldness in his eyes. And I was like, oh man,
Mm.
if you're not willing to forgive, like, I don't know, I don't know what's next for you. Because even the scriptures say, if you don't forgive, you're handed over to the tormentors, right?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't too long after that he ended up, taking his own life. Um, and so I had this phrase in me that he became a casualty of war. It was like my thought process, because I know he was still trying to battle,
Hmm.
the enemy, but he got overtaken by the enemy. And it was like he had so much zeal without wisdom. And I liken it to someone who's going to go charge the battle lines of a huge army by yourself.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not wise. And I think that's what happened to him. And later down the road, about a couple months later, my wife stumbled across these CDs in my closet. It was a CDs on a book that he actually, my brother, had given me years ago. And it was a book titled Needless Casualties of War.
Oh man.
And I started listening through it, and everything it said not to do, he was effectively doing spiritually in fighting these kind of principalities and powers.
Wow. But
And I know it's kind of a bizarre thing to even think about, but that's kind of his story, you
sure,
know?
sure. So at the end of the day, hopelessness obviously was surrounding him, right? But did he just, you think ultimately he just felt alone? Like nobody could understand him, and that nobody,
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was,
yeah, yeah. He felt all alone, and I think the rejection that he dealt with really caused him to isolate because rejection's hard. When you get rejected by the church,
yeah.
it's a rejection at the deepest level because it's supposed to be the safest place.
Mm,
So I think a lot of people that are even deconstructing, to your point, a lot of them have been wounded by the church at the deepest level, and they're going, something's not right. I shouldn't be this broken from a system that's supposed to bring me healing, right?
yeah.
And so at some levels they're discerning right, but some of the deconstructive process, you know isn't always healthy. But to each his own, in their journey.
Well, you and I, we come from similar backgrounds, right? Both from doing some modeling and some acting and traveling. And let's just say in the nicest way, you and I were very promiscuous in our past lives, and some of the
Yeah,
things that we ventured out into. And you and I had this, both of us individually, kind of a unique encounter with God at a crossroads in our life that really just wrecked us in the best way, right?
yeah,
And took us on this path of, there's a better way to do this, right? And the world needs hope, man. And what would you say to the families out there, brother, that have experienced this from suicide, right? The loss of a family
yeah,
member, or I mean, just here recently in our local community, there was a father that took his life, in a parking lot here locally, and left, two teenage
yeah.
children behind, right? And people will say, like, we had no idea. Like, we just had no idea that he was going
Wow,
through
wow.
this internal struggle and turmoil. But it's a real thing, man. So what would you say to the families? Any advice that you have for people that maybe are struggling, or maybe that have already, struggled through this and are really experiencing this tremendous loss?
I would start with let me start with the guys maybe that might be struggling internally and wanting to commit suicide.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them, this isn't always the case, but I think actually a lot of them are really close to God, that they don't know it
Hmm.
because they're at the end of themselves. And the devil just tries to say, hey, if you just take your own life, it'll all be well. Whereas God is saying, if you just lay down your life,
Mm.
you'll find life. If you lose your life, you'll find your life, right? So there's this subtle twist. God's version is you surrender your identity, all that you are, everything that you've made, that you've created for yourself. You just die to yourself and surrender to God and let him remake you. You'll find life, right? But the twisted version is, man, I just need to end my life and this will all go away,
Mm.
right? And so I think some people, they're actually really close to God,
Yeah.
and if they'll surrender to Jesus fully, that'll happen. Some other people, I think, if they're wounded, you have to find forgiveness. Like forgiveness is the doorway to freedom for the betrayals, the closest wound, the people that are closest to you. And our God is not a God who doesn't understand that. He was betrayed by those closest to him, so he understands betrayal. It's the deepest pain that you can carry is betrayal, especially from a loved one.
Mm.
But in the midst of that, if you've been betrayed and you take it to God and you learn to forgive, man, a well of like life and oil and wine that's medicinal will pour out from your life onto other people. It's like betrayal, and the pain of it almost becomes a gift in the sense, because once you get to eternity, you can't forgive anymore. There's nobody to forgive.
Hmm.
This is the only opportunity we get to even experience that. I'm not saying it's easy. It's hard as hell to forgive, especially when you've been betrayed. But if you can, it'll help unlock your heart so that the depths, the bitterness and the pain that you feel for wanting to end your life, will actually, will be something good that will come from that.
Yeah.
Into those families that have experienced this, like there's almost no words, because the pain for some people is always going to be there. The only thing that I would say is that if you keep leaning into God and you have to forgive yourself, forgive your loved one that's passed away, forgive any of your family members. Forgiveness is the key, is a doorway into eternity. But somehow, some way, God can use this situation for good. The same way he allowed me to plunder hell on my brother's behalf.
Mm.
Like he can flip this script and allow it to become a source of strength and blessing to help other people in some way.
Yeah.
And so that's like, I always hold on to those anchors, like an anchor of hope. Like, God, I don't know how you're going to do it, because in the midst of this, it feels like hell. And I hold on to this phrase: whenever you're going through hell, just don't stop.
Yeah.
Don't stop there. Keep going, because you will come out the other side of it, and there is like this anchor of hope. God is our anchor. He's going to turn it for good. It's that Romans 8:28. He will turn it for good for those that love him and are called according to his purposes.
Yeah, man. Amen. Yeah, I want to talk about worship here for a second. All right.
Yeah.
And if you can, for the audience, because we have all different people listening to this, right, from
Mhm.
different backgrounds and different nationalities.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious, man, what is your definition of worship before we dive a little further into that?
Yeah. Worship is your absolute surrender to God. It's like full putting all your affections, all your love, and all your adoration on the one true God. And then in the midst of that, there's this idea that you become what you focus your heart and your affections on. And so that in this idea of full adoration, surrender, adoration, worship, God, you end up becoming transformed into that image to become like him.
Yeah. So there's so many different tools, right, that we can use from a secular standpoint or a believing Christian
Yeah.
standpoint. There's so many different tools that we can use, right? Whether it's,
Yeah.
power of positive thinking. As a man thinks, so is he, right? Laws of
Yeah.
attraction. It could be, fasting. It could be exercise. It could be mental wellness and health and self-care and therapy, right? There's all kinds of things that we can
Yeah.
do to becoming kind of the highest versions of what we are. Michael, if you had to
Yes.
say, how important is worship in this for anybody, for stability of their faith, of progress and movement, and keeping hope in their life? Where would you rate worship
Yeah.
in that?
I think it's the most important thing, personally, because it's the highest expression to which we are capable of. Absolute purest affection of love to the highest being that there is.
Mm,
So your maximum expression, maximum creator, and those two things meet together. It's the highest expression. And so for me, within that is that we're in this world, right? The Bible says you're in the world, but not of the world.
yeah,
And so our minds get set on our problems, all these situations. And as we get fixated on those things, you feel the weight of it. It becomes overwhelming and it affects you physically, your body, right?
absolutely.
Because you're looking at, how's this problem? I get anxiety attack because of this thing and this problem. And it overwhelms you because you're looking at the magnitude of the problem.
Yeah.
Well, when you use that same function, but you put it on God, you're talking about the source and the fountain of life, purity, blessing, peace, joy, hope. So you're focusing on that, and then that comes to you. Talk about law of attraction.
Mm,
You worship on God, and then who he is comes to you, the source of joy and peace and hope. And so then the problem becomes put in its proper perspective. It's not that our problems aren't still big,
mhm.
but in light of who God is, the creator of the universe, there's no problem that's really big. It's like a grain of sand in light of how big God is.
Yeah.
But when we're focused on our problem, it's almost a form of worship, and the problem goes and
Mm,
it overtakes us. Worship gets the problem to go and God to go, and then the fountain from which we drink from is joy, peace, hope, patience.
mhm.
Because your problem is a fountain too. It's a fountain of anxiety and frustration and insecurity and all that.
Yeah,
But in light of God, then you can look at your problem from the right perspective and go, wait a minute, okay, God sees this. He's always looking at your problems with the lens of faith,
mhm.
right? He's going, oh, this is a big problem for you, but let me show you how to see this.
Mm,
And then hope hits your heart and faith hits your heart, and then you can then you can process it
yeah.
correctly.
Well, I love that
So
because a lot of people we don't share this enough, but you take that word repent, right? Which is like it can almost seem like a curse word to the way some pastors preach it and
Yeah,
the way some people.
repent.
Yeah, right. You're
Yeah.
terrible. You're worth nothing, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
turn
yeah.
from your wicked sins, and everything that we've heard, right? But like if you break down that word, repent, right? It means to change the way you think. It means to enter
Yeah.
up to the penthouse, have a different
Yeah.
perspective of your life. And you've seen this, we've all seen this, but
Yes.
it's like when you're in the penthouse and you've got a 360 view
Yes.
and you're looking in downtown New York, right? And you look down and the cabs look
Yeah.
this small and people look this small, and all you see is this open sky. It's like whatever the problem is, you realize, wow, from this perspective, it doesn't nearly look as devastating, right? It doesn't nearly look as
Totally.
this challenging, right? But I
Yeah.
believe
Yeah.
but what I hear you saying is that somehow worship, when you engage in that place of gratitude and that thankfulness and that surrender, that all of a sudden it changes the way you think and brings you into a higher perspective to deal with your problems, because the problems don't necessarily leave,
Yeah.
right? But it just brings
Yeah.
them,
Totally.
it brings them in the right.
Can I give you can I give you an example? Even out of the season, when my brother passed away, I also dealt with my brother dying. I dealt with an intense betrayal from a close friend. My situation was changing. I had lost a children's minister to cancer. My grandmother died, and then my friend died of a heart attack, all within like a 2 month period.
Mm,
And I was overwhelmed by all this. And I went on a sabbatical and I was like feeling the anxiety of like life constricting. It felt hard to breathe. I was like, my gosh, like it felt like my world was closing in on me, you know?
mm,
And so I'm on the beach, like praying, I'm journaling with God. I'm like, God, how do you see this situation? That's my question, because I want to see from his eyes, not mine.
yeah.
And when I journaled, I wrote this down. I wrote, that which you perceive to be your tomb is actually your cocoon.
Mm,
And I was like, ooh,
come
wait
on
a
now.
minute. I like that. That's a reframe. That's like seeing it totally differently. Because I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Because a cocoon and a tomb, they look very similar. They're both a form of death,
Yeah.
right? That caterpillar's dying. But
Yep.
when he comes out the other side, he's a new being. He's got wings. He can soar. He's something different. And so right after I wrote that down, I walked out. I'm at 30A in Florida. I walk out into the ocean. There was hardly anybody around, and I'm sitting out there in the ocean, and all of a sudden this big monarch butterfly goes right by my head, and I was like, oh wow, that's cool. And then another one, and then it was like almost 100 monarch butterflies. I'm in like my migration pattern of monarch butterflies.
Wow.
Right after I wrote this down, and it just was something that just spoke to my heart and gave me such an anchor in the midst of the season, in the midst of every day that I started to feel anxiety. I'm like, oh, this is my cocoon. I'm about to transform, you know?
Mm,
And so the anxiety would then become an indicator for me, like, oh, I'm in transformation. This is going to be good, you know?
sure.
And so doesn't mean it wasn't still hard, but it
Yeah.
gave me an anchor of a reframe, how to think of it differently.
Well, and again, you take that as like a sign, right? That somebody's looking down on you, right? Like we
Totally.
got your back here, right? And
Totally.
which it brings you back to that other element, that you realize you're not alone, right? You're not alone in
Yeah.
this bigger, um, this big world that we live in, right? With all these different
Yeah.
intricacies going on and things that are happening behind the scenes. It's like we have a Father in heaven. We have a Creator that loves us unconditionally,
Yeah.
and really is out there moving our steps, for the good, right? Um, I love this about you and Meredith, and obviously anybody who's followed you and your wife. She's done an unbelievable transformation in the worship space and in creative music for the church, and not just the church but worldwide. But what I love about you guys is you really live this. You really live it, man. It's not just a song. It's not just a song lab where you're
Yeah.
getting in there with some drums and a guitar, but it's like you guys really believe this. I mean, you believe in the art of worship to a capacity, that not only do you believe it is, like you said, the number one maybe breakthrough or gateway into, hope, but you've walked this thing out, man. And was there a season in
Yeah.
your life where that revelation came to you? Because you guys weren't up on stage singing, right? You guys your wife wasn't, performing in these great Christian arenas all over the world and producing number one songs. Like there was a time where it was just about you guys, I'm sure, in your personal walks in a basement somewhere when
Totally,
nobody
totally.
was listening. Could you maybe speak back to that for the audience and just give us some hope with that?
Sure. And sure, and for clarity too for people, I can't sing a lick and I can't play an instrument, so I'm not a musical kind of person whatsoever.
Yeah.
I just love it. But really, the journey for us started when my wife and I we got married and we moved out to Los Angeles, hoping to be lights in the entertainment industry in some way. And I was a brand new believer at the time.
Yeah.
I think it was my first year being a Christian. My wife grew up in the church. I didn't. I grew up thug on the streets. And we're living in LA. And I think it's our first month being out there, and I'm laying in bed and I'm like half asleep, half awake in the morning, and it felt like a bomb dropped into my chest, and this idea hit me that it's all about worship. And I woke up screaming like it's all about worship, and I jolted her out of bed, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "I don't know, but it's all about worship."
Mm.
And I began to see that everything was vying for our affections in some way, that the ultimate battle is a battle of worship that's over who or what is going to be worshiped in some way. And it just sent us off on this journey to discover why is worship such a big deal? Why is, you look at kids that follow certain musicians or actors, they begin to transform themselves to look like them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
You see that in a negative sense. And so how much of the entertainment industry has grabbed a hold of our kids? And I was like, okay, well, what's the flip side of that? What's the God version of that? Where God grabs a hold of us and we become more like God, more like the divine than the creature.
Mm.
One form of worship pulls us down towards a more of a creature animalistic type of nature, and one lifts us to the divine, which is
Mm.
more of our God-given nature.
Yeah, man, it's so powerful. I
So
think
yeah.
I think about that here recently. Like, just it's so easy, Michael, to get bogged down with the cares of this world, right? I mean, you're starting that new business and maybe it doesn't, hit the numbers that you want, right? You're struggling with connecting with your children. Maybe you and your wife are struggling to a certain capacity to connect and communicate properly and effectively. And it's like it feels
Mm.
like just burden after burden after burden. And I don't know about you, man, but it's like I will find myself in seasons where it's like I'll turn. I'll just not that I'm not
Yeah.
that my heart is turning from God, but it's just I'll just turn and I'll just get in this
Yeah.
work mode and it's all about will and I got to fix this and I got to carry this and I got to resolve this and I got to provide for this, and it's like and then,
Yeah.
and it's like you'll chase that long enough to where you'll finally again hopelessness will start setting in, depression will start setting in, insecurity will start setting in, and then finally somewhere through that process you'll finally fall on your knees and you'll go, I can't do this anymore. Right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. That's real.
but it's
It's
really but
real.
it's
I've been there
really
many times.
it's not easy. It's not easy to do that, right? But
Yeah.
that's that piece of worship I think you're talking about, right? Which again just comes back to going, listen, I'm not big enough, but you are, right?
Yeah.
And just to be able to turn that, when you did this documentary, I'm curious because I remember the phone call. You reached out to me one day and we were just chatting about life or whatever. And I said, man, it's amazing what you guys are doing and all the traveling and the worship movement and all this kind of stuff. And you were like, I think I want to do a documentary about this. And I was like, really? And of course, you'd never done a documentary before, right? I mean, this was something that
Yeah.
like you grabbed in the spirit, grabbed in faith, and said, "Hey, I feel like I'm supposed to do this," right? First off, I commend you for that. And we saw that it got completed and it was beautifully shot and what a powerful story behind the documentary. But can you give the title of that and can you just share a little bit of the ups and downs and how many attacks did you experience through that and how hard was that fight to actually finish that project?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, but can I, before we jump there, can we go back to the point you just made? I think is super important.
Sure,
And I would love to dive into that for a second because I I,
please.
I find myself doing that often. I think guys that are like type A, we love to get stuff done. We just like the checklist never ends. And so we feel like we got to just crank, and grind and get it done and just go, 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 go.
Yep.
And several seasons of my life, I ran myself into the ground and like didn't even want to get up off the floor sometimes. Just like, oh, I can't even move.
Yeah.
And so to your point about falling to getting back on your knees and getting back to that intimate time with the Lord. And I think that we just have to carve out that space to shut it down.
Yeah.
Phones aside, time in worship, word. It's like it has to be like so vital of just a place to be able to just recharge and let go and even have a day to shut off. Because when I'm not doing that, man, I my body starts to feel it. I start to feel it in just all different kinds of ways. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I just think that's to your point. It's just super important to not let ourselves get to that place as men, and to
So good.
fight for that the secret place.
Yeah.
Um,
By the way, thank you for coming back to that. And ultimately, when I hear that, here's how I feel like it affects me personally is it just takes me out of presence, right? It
mm,
takes me out of being present. It's like
yeah,
I'm in the room with my wife and kids, but I'm really not in the room with my wife and
but
kids,
not in the room.
right?
Yeah,
I'm in the board meeting, but I'm really not in the board meeting, right? I'm
mm,
chasing all these orbs and all these problems and all these issues that I feel like that I have to carry, right?
yeah,
Alone,
yeah,
which is a lie of the
yeah,
enemy, which is the biggest lie of the enemy.
yeah,
But no, thank you for sharing that, man, because it does bring you back to that place of presence and that surrender element for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
So, and how do you navigate it? Like, what do you do? Like, how do you navigate those seasons and snap out of that?
Yeah, man, I'm a little bit more stubborn than you probably. But no, when you sense that the way you're walking is not matching up with your ontology, right? That the way of your being is not matching up with who you really are. I feel like you just know that, right? It's like you said, your body starts tensing up, you don't start sleeping as well, right? You find yourself in, I mean, heck, man, I've had moments where, I mean, I've went into full blown panic attacks, right? Like sleepless night of the
Yeah,
soul kind of stuff where 2 or 3 nights
yeah,
in a row, I'm waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and all I feel is fear, anxiety,
yeah,
worry, doubt, all these things
yeah,
that the enemy
yeah,
is just constantly bombarding us with to ultimately produce one thing, and that's just hopelessness, right? And
yeah,
how does he
yeah,
get us to quit, right? And I think that's so important what you said. So I'm like you. For me, it's definitely presence. It's stopping. It's obviously exercise is a big thing for me in my life. It's like I got to I
yeah,
got to get the body moving. I got to stop and I got to quiet myself. Like you said, no
yeah,
phones. Whether it's a good book, whether it's breathing exercises, whether it's just personal meditation, obviously worship. I mean, all these things for me are like, again, going back to like little tools that help me
yeah,
kind of reset in that moment, But
yeah,
but I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
think but I don't think we're giving a lot of these conversations to men out there who are trying to do it alone, you know?
yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah, totally. Yeah, I think to your point, having men to talk to and share your burdens with is super important. To pray with one another, carry each other's burdens. That's important. I know one of the tools that I discovered in 2020, and I talked about this a lot, but I'd never practiced it to this degree.
mhm.
Um, was when and it first happened to me when I was walking through an airport and I started to see masks on people. And I looked over the TV and I saw people dying in China at the airport and then all this fear started hitting me. It was like, you're gonna die. This is the end. Da, 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 da. Like started hitting me, right? And so I started feeling all this fear. And then aggressively, my spirit just goes, no, no pestilence shall come near my dwelling, the Bible says. I'll walk in health. When and that stuff comes around me, it's gonna dissolve in my. I started declaring all the opposite, but aggressively, right?
Yeah.
And as that happened, I started to get chills on my body for 20 straight minutes walking through the airport. I felt like anything that was going to come in my presence would have just dissolved, is how like much I was radiating energy and life.
Sure.
And I began to have this faith attack. I turned my coin to faith attack.
Yeah.
Like it was the inversion of anxiety attack. And so I began to practice this anytime I would feel fear, anxiety, or like I'm laying in bed and I've had those panic attack nights. It's hard to breathe, and these thoughts are coming bang, 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 bang. You're never going to be able to do this. And I was like, I go, no. and I start to declare the opposite
Yeah.
and about who God is. God is my provider. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills.
Mm,
He's not strapped for cash. He never is going to leave me begging for bread. He'll never do this. And I start just aggressively going that way.
that's right.
And man, I got chills right now just talking about it.
Sure. Me too.
But it's like this warfare and like take over your spirit, like not let the enemy overtake us, because a lot of that stuff is coming from the outside. You're getting bombarded. You're in a weak state. So the enemy is going, he's like lobbing these thoughts at you, right? And so we just think, oh, I got this problem. I got to deal with this. No, not right now. I'm trying to sleep. Get off me,
Yeah.
And so
I read a book by Steve Backlund that was titled "You're Crazy If You Don't Talk to Yourself," right? And it's one of those thoughts that people think, oh, well, that guy's over there talking to himself. He must be crazy, right? And he took the complete opposite approach. It's like, if you're not talking to yourself, you're crazy. Michael, just keep preaching and share that piece right there. How important it is to use our words, whether it's scripture or not, but use the power of our words to speak back to
yes.
the problem or the situation.
Yeah, so faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, right? Fear comes by hearing, hearing by the word of the enemy. Both come by hearing.
There you go.
So what are you listening to? And so if you start to feel fear and anxiety, you know that you're hearing from the enemy. And so for me, one of the things I do is like, what's the opposite of that? It says the spirit and the flesh are in opposition. So if the enemy is saying one thing, God's probably saying the exact opposite. And so if I'm having a hard time hearing God's voice, I'm just going to declare the opposite of what I'm hearing, but I'm going to say it loud so that I hear it here and it overrides the voice of the enemy. And it sounds stupid and like overly simple, but it actually works for me. So,
well,
it's
what the opposite does. Like, people in the world, whether you have a religious background or not, they call this laws of attraction, right? They call this the power of
positive thinking.
Absolutely. As a man thinks, so is he, right?
Yeah.
It's the greatest tool. And I would go back to that, where you would say it's worship is the greatest thing that's taking you to another level in your life. There's no denying the power of that. But for me, it is that thing right there, speaking to myself, speak to the mountain, right? Declare unto the mountain what the situation is. And I've seen this with personal sickness in my own life. I've seen this with sickness over my kids' life. I've seen this with bank accounts that look like they were, in a graveyard. And I'm believing God for the next big move of what I need for my life. I've seen this into two double lung collapses where I thought my life was going to end early. And
crazy.
But gosh, man, does it release something? It's so powerful, the hope and the faith that comes from just speaking to the situation,
Totally.
But the enemy wants to shut us up, man. And what typically happens is, and
isolate.
This is why I think men have such a hard time sharing with each other, right? That piece in scripture, it says, confess your sin to one another so that you might be saved, right? Well, we know that only God can forgive sin, right? Men don't have the power to do that. But what's the point of that scripture? And I believe it's that when you just bring to light the issue, right? The insecurity, the fear, the shame, the worry, the doubt, whatever that is, once you bring that to the light, I mean, Michael, immediately it loses its power. But then
It totally does.
But then what's beautiful about that is the other person on the other side of you now feels like they're sitting with a human being, right? They feel like, okay, well,
totally.
man, I never thought you would be that way, Michael. Will, I never thought you would struggle in that area. But man, let me tell you what I'm dealing with, right? And before you know it, you guys are laughing together now. And it's like nothing's changed, right? You might still be bound by, that issue or that habit or that toxic whatever, but just sharing it, bringing it to the light and knowing that you're not alone can release just absolute peace and hope.
It's so good, Will. I think, men we bought into the lie that we're drawn to each other by our accolades, and we're really drawn to each other in our brokenness,
man.
Which is sharing and confessing that stuff. That's what really connects us.
Absolutely, man. Well, how many times have you shown up in those meetings, right? Whether it's Hollywood or whether it's a business meeting or whatever. And I call it, just a room of peacocks, right? You walk in and you can feel the atmosphere in about 30 seconds, and
Yeah,
everybody's in there judging the watch you're wearing, the
yeah,
suit you're wearing, the car you drove in with. How many times have you shown up at a meeting and they say, "Hey, what's your name?" And the very first thing they ask you, they don't ask you if you're a father, they don't ask you if you're a husband, they don't ask you if you're a leader in your community. They say, "What do you do?
yeah,
What do you do?" Right? And
yeah,
and again, it goes into this sizing up thing, man. And I
yeah,
want to debunk that, man. I want to get that off
yeah.
where, the greatest passions of our life should be that we're a faithful husband, right? That
Mhm.
we're an incredible
Yeah,
father, we're a dear friend, we're a good son, right? We're a
yeah,
great leader in our communities, and again, that's got to change, man. But it's what you guys are doing. It's so powerful. It's so beautiful. Everywhere
mm.
you guys walk into, you're seeing cities transformed. You're seeing communities transformed. You're seeing people set free. You're seeing hope brought to them. And dude, I'm so proud of you as a friend, but also the leader that you and your wife are, not just for the body of Christ, but just for the world in general and the way you believe. So,
Thank you, bro. And yeah, I feel the same way about you. And I think what you just said, aside from what people do, you said, I want to be a good father. I want to be a good friend. You flipped the do into who are you? Like
mhm,
the identity of people, right? Like
yeah,
for people to understand who they truly are as those things, as a father, as a son, everything else, then the do has become so secondary,
yeah, man, yeah. Well, brother, keep doing what you're doing, man. I mean,
Thank you, bro.
this is going to encourage so many people, man. I feel lighter. I feel lighter. You're my homeboy, but I feel lighter just having this conversation with you.
Yeah, same.
You brought so much wisdom to the table, man. And so as we're closing out here, tell me what's on the horizon. How do people follow you? How do people follow Song Lab? And tell us what's on the horizon for the rest of 2026 for you.
Yeah, you can Instagram Michael Mauldin. My wife and I have a ministry called Song Lab MSC. We just teach churches how to create music that helps people connect to God through music. I'm on staff, executive pastor of a church. It's called Shepherd's Grove. It's about to be called Cathedral. We're tapping back into the roots of the history of the church.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a real cool move of God that's taking place here in Orange County. We want to see this region touched by God. So yeah,
I love it, brother. Well, listen,
thanks for having me on, bro.
are you kidding me, dude? Thank you for being here, man. Love to you and the family, and keep fighting the good fight of faith, and keep bringing encouragement, man. The world needs it. So,
You too.
yeah,
Interrupt.
interrupt, buddy. Listen, you take care, friend. We'll see you soon. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
Bye, brother.
Thank you for spending time with me today. Remember, it's not about pretending the story is finished. It's about having the courage to keep writing it, even in the middle. If this podcast has encouraged you or inspired you in any ways, please follow us at enterupwithwill.com and across all social media platforms. And please like, subscribe, and share for more. Until next time, keep showing up, keep rising, and keep choosing to enter up.